Howdy, I'm Gary, Dillon Precision's Human Manual, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to convert your BL550 or an older RL550 to the current 550C type of frame and linkage. The advantages of the RL550C are that the upper link arm pins are no longer pins, they're now threaded posts. They have a built-in worm screw for greasing, and the lower crank now has a Zerk fitting so that you can easily grease it with an automotive grease gun. So this makes maintenance much easier. To begin, frame change kit, one each. Besides packing material, this contains your new frame with the new thread in, thread out upper link arm pivot pins, a punch, which is really a nail with the tip ground off, and an alignment tool and instructions. And the new instructions for your 550C, which, because I'm here, we don't need. So let's start by taking off a few extraneous pieces of equipment off of our machine. So now we won't lose the screws and we can get to that pin. Okay, next, let's take off the spent primer cup, get that out of the way. Now we gotta take the handle off. Again, it's easier to keep all the pieces together, it makes it harder to lose. Next step, we're going to take the primer feed off. If you've got a BL550, all you're going to have is the short primer seating apparatus and not the whole primer feed, but it's the same two screws. Unhook the spring, lift up, that all comes off. Set that off to the side. Next, we need to pull off the shell plate and the platform off the top of the shaft. Loosen the set screw on the side of the shaft about a turn or two. That allows us to spin out the shell plate bolt. Shell plate bolt, shell plate. Set them where you won't lose them. Careful about the little detent ball. Then two bolts to take the platform off the. Platform is off. Next, there's a set screw in the bottom of the shaft. It has to be loosened up enough to allow you to push this cross pin out. You do not need to remove the set screw, just back it out. About 2 turns is going to be adequate. Once that set screw is loose enough, this cross pin will just push out, as you can see. Remove the tool head. The shaft lifts out. Next, we need to tap out these pins. Now, on the RL550B and earlier models, the right link arm pivot pin is hollow. So with the shaft out of the way, put the pin through there. See how that pin comes out? Next, come back the other direction, and you have to line up that punch with the solid part of that pin. That pin comes out. Now hold on to this, because when we pull out our punch, that comes off. So now we just need to unbolt this frame from our strong mount. And now the frame is detached from the top of the strong mount. Now, What to do with the old frame? Well, you could make a lamp out of it. It's aluminum, so it's highly valuable for recycling material, or it's abstract art. But either way, we don't need it anymore. Now we will mount the new frame to our strong mount. Just put the bolts and screws on finger tight until we get all of them in, then we'll tighten them up. And when you're bolting it down, do bolt it down like you were torquing the heads on a small block Chevy. So while we've got the linkage off of the machine, we're going to go ahead and upgrade this crank assembly as well, because there's a newer crank, came out a few years ago. And you'll notice it only has one hole as opposed to a bunch of holes. And so now on the new crank pivot pin, there's a Zerk fitting. For those of you who do not know what a Zerk fitting is, it's a little fixture. It's got a spring and ball inside, allows you to use an automotive grease gun to snap over it and grease this lower pin. If you look, you'll see there's a wormhole that fills up with grease when it's inside, so it's much easier to maintain than trying to squirt holes through here with a syringe. Okay, so we need to disassemble the link arm from this side so we can pull this stuff out. Alrighty, we now have the old crank disassembled. Let's put the new pin together by first threading the little Zerk fitting in there. Alrighty, for the purposes of this, we're going to reassemble this dry. You really need to smear some grease in these wormholes and when you put it together. But this way, it just makes it easier for everything to be seen in the camera. Now, when you put it on there, notice that there's a right side up and an upside down. The right link arm has to have this wedge on it because the spent primer cup hangs off of that. So this one has to be upright and on the right. Right side oriented upwards. This one, again, says Dillon, oriented upwards. Now that our new crank is assembled with the link arms, we're ready to attach this to our new 550C frame. Okay, with the new 550C frame, we don't need a hammer to reassemble it because these pins unscrew. Okay, so take one more quick look. Make sure your hook is on the right and on the top. Okay, now you notice that the heads on these pins is not really very wide. And that's intentional because we don't want you to over torque it like a small block Chevy and strip out the frame. Just snug. Alrighty, now that we've got our linkage attached to our new frame, we have to put the rest of the old parts back together, starting with the shaft. Now when you put the shaft together, it's not essential, but it's nice to put this set screw on the left side. Slide out the tool head. Drop the shaft down. We've got our pivot pin, and when you put this all together, you want to re-grease everything. Use grease, sticky stuff. Don't use oil. The only thing that gets oil is the shaft gets 30 weight motor oil. And when you retighten the set screw in the bottom of the shaft, you want to tighten it until it stops, and then back it out just about a 1/16 of a turn, just enough to allow this pin to float so that the set screw is not jammed into that pin and forcing it to stay in one place. Okay, that's tight. Back it up a little. Now that the shaft is back in the frame, we need to reattach the platform. And when we do that, we need to make sure that we get the platform aligned. Fortunately, we include a handy dandy alignment tool in with the frame change kit. So first, don't forget this little bracket. This is for the fail-safe for the powder measure. You'll be really unhappy if you have to repeat this. So that goes on, sticks out on the left side. Platform goes on top. Now we're only putting these screws in finger tight right now. We will tighten them after we have the platform aligned. For the alignment tool, we need to put a tool head back in the frame. The alignment tool looks like a punch. It goes inside of the powder measure die. You've already got this die because it's off your powder measure. And you'll thread this into station 1 all the way down till it stops. Next, might as well reattach the handle because we're going to need to pull that down. Okay, now the alignment tool goes into the hole where the live primer comes up through the bottom of the platform. So get that in there once it's lined up. And this you do want to torque down to the specs of a small block Chevy. If the platform comes loose, you start making ammunition that's not straight and things get out of alignment and it's like a train wreck. So tighten these 2 bolts really, really well. Then check your work. Yep. Slides over the punch without lifting it up. Alignment is good. So next step, might as well attach the nut onto the bottom of the handle. Use your Allen wrench to help give you leverage. There's a hole in the handle. Okay, next, put the detent ball spring back in the correct hole, which is to the left of the shell plate bolt hole. Set the detent ball on there. Make sure that at least half of the detent ball is protruding above the top of the platform. Set your shell plate back on. Shell plate bolt and index sprocket. Tighten the shell plate bolt down until it stops. Back it up about 1/8 of a turn. Hold it in place, and with the alignment tool out of the hole, make sure that shell plate rotates. Once that shell plate bolt tension is set correctly, remember to snug the set screw on the left side of the shaft. And we now have an RL550C on our bench and leftover parts that again you can make into a lamp, use it for abstract art, or sell it to somebody you don't know and don't like because it's cheaper to buy a machine than to be given a frame and buy all the individual parts. And there you have it. We have now removed and swapped out the frame and the crank to convert our former RL550B into the RL550C. Again, the advantages of having the RL550C frame and crank are that you've got screw-in pivot pins for the upper part of the link arms. They have a worm groove on the pin, and you can just use a needle fitting on a grease gun to lubricate it. On the crank, on the bottom end, you've got a Zerk fitting so that you can use an automotive grease gun to grease that lower pin. This is an update that will save you time and make you a little bit happier because it's a lot easier now to grease your machine. You don't have to tear it apart to lubricate it, and I really think you're going to enjoy it. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.